In the dark underbelly of society, a group of individuals known as vampires roam the streets, seeking their next prey. But these vampires are not the fictional creatures of folklore and legend. They are real people who have taken on the persona of the immortal beings they so idolize, and in their quest for bloodlust, they have committed some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Join us as we delve into the twisted world of real-life vampire murderers, exploring their motives, methods, and the chilling aftermath of their deadly deeds. Joshua Rudiger. In the shadows of San Francisco, a predator was on the loose, preying on the most vulnerable members of society. But this was no ordinary criminal. He claimed to be a centuries-old vampire, thirsting for human blood. Joshua Rudiger's reign of terror left a trail of destruction as he prowled the streets with a knife, targeting homeless individuals and leaving them with slashed necks. But for one woman, his thirst for blood proved fatal, as she succumbed to his savage attack. When finally apprehended, Rudiger made a chilling confession, declaring prey is prey, and admitting to his insatiable hunger for the life-giving fluid that flowed through his victim's veins. Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento, committed a gruesome spree of 6 murders in Sacramento, California in 1977 and 1978. He not only killed his victims, but also cannibalized them and drank their blood. When he was put on trial in 1979, Chase pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but the court found him legally sane at the time of the crimes and convicted him on all 6 counts of murder. In an interview, Chase revealed that he would walk around checking if doors were unlocked, and if a door was locked, it would mean he was not welcome inside. Diana Semenuha. In the heart of Ukraine, a self-proclaimed vampire and Satanist was on a twisted mission to find a cure for her muscle-wasting disease. By drinking the blood of innocent street children, Diana Semenuha's quest led her to lure dozens of vulnerable youngsters to her lair, where she drugged and bound them before draining their life-giving fluid. For months, she bled her victims regularly, selling their excess blood to other members of the occult community. But when the police finally caught up with her, they discovered a scene straight out of a horror movie. 7 unconscious children lying helpless in her apartment. Semenuha was arrested and charged with her heinous crimes, but shockingly, she was released when her homeless victims disappeared back onto the streets. Wayne Boden. The city of Montreal was in the grip of fear as a series of brutal murders and rapes rocked the community. The killer, known only as the Vampire Rapist, left a gruesome calling card on his victims, bite marks on their breasts like a savage animal. Wayne Boden, a seemingly unremarkable 26-year-old, was the mastermind behind these horrific crimes, slipping into his victims' apartments unnoticed and leaving behind a trail of naked bodies. Despite extensive police investigations, he continued his killing spree across 2 cities for 3 long years, leaving no signs of struggle at the crime scenes. It wasn't until an orthodontist linked the bite marks to Boden's dental records that he was finally caught. His trial revealed a chilling glimpse into the mind of a remorseless killer, and he was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. But even behind bars, the legend of the Vampire Rapist lived on, as one of Canada's most infamous and terrifying murderers. Tsutomu Miyazaki. The streets of Tokyo and Saitama were plunged into terror as a monster roamed free, targeting young girls with a horrific level of sadism. Tsutomu Miyazaki, with his hands fused to his wrists, was a figure of grotesque deformity, but his twisted desires were even more repugnant. He would drive around, searching for his next victim, a girl between 4 and 7 years old, before abducting her and taking her to a secluded spot. There, he would indulge in unspeakable acts of violence and depravity, strangling, dismembering, and even cannibalizing his young victims. Miyazaki's horrific spree of murder and mutilation left the community reeling as he taunted the families of his victims with grotesque trophies made from their remains. Tracey Wigginton. In the quiet suburbs of Brisbane, a chilling story of horror unfolded as a young woman's bloodlust led her to commit one of the most shocking crimes in Australian history. Tracey Wigginton, known as the lesbian vampire killer, had a taste for the macabre, and her twisted desires drove her to lure an innocent father of 4 to a secluded spot where she could indulge her dark fantasies. With 3 other women, she plotted a gruesome murder, and when they had their prey cornered, they unleashed their fury, stabbing him a staggering 27 times before Tracey, in a frenzy, nearly severed his head and drank his blood. Her heinous act of violence shocked the nation, and she was swiftly sentenced to life in prison. But even that could not contain her obsession with blood, and her release in 2012 sparked fears that she may once again turn her twisted desires into reality. Roderick Ferrell. In 1996, the sleepy town of Eustis, Florida, was rocked by a gruesome and grisly crime. 2 parents, Richard Windorf and Naoma Ruth Queen, were brutally murdered in their own home, their bodies discovered by their terrified daughter, Jennifer Windorf. What made the crime all the more shocking was the motive behind it, an initiation ritual into a vampire club. Roderick Ferrell, a self-proclaimed 500-year-old vampire, had come to Florida with his accomplice, Scott Anderson, to induct Heather Windorf, Richard and Naoma's daughter, into their cult. But when they arrived at the Windorf's home, Ferrell's bloodlust took over, and he bludgeoned Richard and Naoma to death with a crowbar. Even as Naoma fought back, throwing hot coffee at him, Ferrell showed no mercy and continued his brutal assault. His motive was chillingly simple: to prove himself worthy of being a vampire. His heinous crime shocked the nation, and his sentence of death made him the youngest American ever to be on death row. Fritz Haarmann. A well-liked second-hand clothes salesman in the 1920s, with an added perk of offering cheap meat to his customers. Little did they know that the source of his meat supply was the runaway boys he had been killing. Taking advantage of the post-war crisis that led to numerous children running away from home, Haarmann would lure them with promises of food and shelter. After feeding them, he would kill them by biting through their windpipes, a move he referred to as his love bite. He would then sexually assault their corpses before dismembering them and selling their flesh as sausage meat or cutlets, masquerading as beef or pork. Haarmann, dubbed the Vampire of Hanover, was responsible for the murder of over 50 boys. He was sentenced to be decapitated by guillotine on April 15, 1925, for his heinous crimes. Marcelo de Andrade. The Brazilian city of Niterói was rocked by a chilling crime spree in 1991, when a predator known as the Vampire of Niterói claimed the lives of 14 innocent children. The killer, Marcelo Andrade, had a penchant for rape, strangulation, and drinking the blood of his victims. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, he also admitted to committing acts of necrophilia with at least one of the boys' bodies. Andrade believed he was doing his victims a favor by killing them. He felt the children had horrible lives on Earth, and by killing them, he could send them to a better place. He lured them with candy and money to secluded areas, raped, strangled, and sometimes beat them to death. He would then collect their blood in a bowl to drink and bury them in a shallow grave. He would carry the collected blood with him everywhere he went. According to him, he believed that by drinking children's blood, he could be as young and beautiful as they were. Andrade's depravity was finally uncovered when one of his victims managed to escape and alert the authorities. The killer was soon apprehended and confessed to all 14 murders. He was placed in preventive detention at the Hader Carrilho Psychiatric Hospital in Rio de Janeiro, but not before he asked police if there was a case like his anywhere else in the world. When asked why he killed, he simply replied, "I liked the boys and I didn't want them to go to hell." Peter Kurten, also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, was one of the most depraved and sadistic serial killers in history. He took pleasure in the sight of blood and drank the blood of victims. His usual modus operandi was to stab his victims, then put his mouth on their open wounds and drink directly from their bloodstream. He often raped his victims while simultaneously stabbing them, sometimes upwards of 25 times, climaxing at the perceived moment of their death. He committed a series of brutal and horrifying murders from February to November 1929. His victims included women, children, and men, and he used a variety of methods to kill them, including stabbing, strangling, and bludgeoning them with a hammer. The police initially believed that there were multiple killers at large, and the public provided over 900,000 different names as potential suspects. Kurten's last murder, in November 1929, was particularly gruesome. He strangled and stabbed a 5-year-old girl 36 times with scissors, and then sent a map to a local newspaper disclosing the location of her grave. Despite his many crimes, Kurten managed to avoid capture for a while, but eventually, a young woman he attacked led the police to his home. At his trial, Kurten was found guilty and sentenced to death by guillotine. Just before his execution, he asked the prison psychiatrist a chilling question. "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck?" The doctor replied that he would, and Kurten's disturbing response was, "That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." The vampire of Dusseldorf's reign of terror was finally over, but his legacy of cruelty and sadism would never be forgotten.